From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Ophthalmology Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Ophthalmology.
Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to JAMA Ophthalmology Author Interviews. Thanks for joining us. I'm Neil Bressler, Editor-in-Chief of JAMA Ophthalmology, and today we're going to look at an investigation in discrimination within the U.S. ophthalmology workforce. And joining us is the corresponding author for this report, Dr. Angeline Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen is an assistant professor of ophthalmology at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Angeline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Neil, for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to discuss this very important topic, and maybe you could tell our listeners why it was important for your group to characterize discrimination within the U.S. ophthalmology workforce. I mean, prior to your study, did we have evidence that such discrimination, unfortunately, might exist?
I think our ophthalmology community has been increasingly attuned to the issues of diversity and disparities within our workforce. We know that a diverse workforce provides better care for a diverse population, and yet we have one of the lowest proportions, for example, of underrepresented and medicine minorities in our field, and we lag behind other specialties too in terms of female representation in our workforce. And we have data on disparities when it comes to gender, for example, in ophthalmology that clearly demonstrates that inequities are pervasive in career outcomes, which range from less access to mentorship, lower incomes, and denials of promotion, and leadership opportunities, for example. I think we intuitively understand that disparities go hand in hand with discrimination, in that discrimination and discriminatory actions, they generate these disparities. But we found in our literature search that discrimination itself has actually been minimally studied in our field. In fact, the only study evaluating discrimination in ophthalmology comes out of Australia and New Zealand. So we hope to evaluate this issue here in the U.S., not only as it relates to gender, but also race and sexual identity. On a personal level, my senior authors, Drs. Melinda Chang and Jessie Berry, like myself, are highly invested in educating and training future ophthalmologists at our institution. So knowing that discrimination can severely undermine physician and trainee wellness and success, we had a particularly personal interest in this topic as well.
So let's get into how you investigated this. I understand this was based on an anonymous survey. Who was it that you actually surveyed to get this information?
I'd like to credit my senior co-author, Dr. Melinda Chang, who was interested in initially looking at the impact of mentorship on career satisfaction and career success. With her survey, this was sent to 10 different national organizations within the United States of ophthalmology organizations. And so this captured those in, subspecialty organizations, for example, and other types of specialty organizations such as Women in Ophthalmology. And so through that survey, we were able to capture many of the ophthalmologists who are either in training or in practice or even retired within our community.
And how many people did you send this out to? And ultimately, how many people answered the survey?
Sure. So the survey was sent out by the individual organizations, and so we don't have direct data as to how many people that went to. However, we do know that around this time, there are about 18,500 ophthalmologists, almost 20,000 ophthalmologists. And so we hope that with this broad outreach to these many different specialty organizations within ophthalmology, we are reaching most of them.
So among the people that actually answered your survey, I understand some of them were ophthalmologists in training, and some of them already have completed their ophthalmology training. What percentage approximately were the ophthalmologists in training versus those who already completed their training and are ophthalmologists?
Yeah, it is difficult to reach ophthalmologists who are in training. They might not be as embedded in these organizations as ophthalmologists are, yet we were able to capture about 16% of trainees within our cohort.
And among the respondents to your survey, and I understand you had a little over 460 people that actually responded to the survey, how many of them indicated that they had experienced some discrimination within the workforce?
Yeah, we found that about 42% of our respondents reported experiencing some form of discrimination in the professional setting. Most of them were women who reported having experiences. We had respondents reporting that they experienced discrimination on the basis of gender, on their race, as well as LGBTQ status.
And if we look, for example, at the women, what were the most frequently cited reasons that they said they had experienced some discrimination? What were the circumstances under which this discrimination occurred?
Broadly, they experienced discrimination just on the basis of gender. But if you look at common themes, the most common themes were surrounding pregnancy and paternity leave and breastfeeding during the time of postpartum.
And do we have information of what the main discriminations that the men may have experienced? What did you find out for them?
For the men, the majority of their experiences of discrimination were related to race and ethnicity.
And specifically, which races with which ethnicities?
We have the most examples coming from those who identified as Black or African American.
And tell me a little more about how this might compare with discrimination in other areas of medicine. Do we know if this is similar? I mean, that's a really high rate, 40%. Is that different perhaps in other areas of medicine, or has it not even been looked at in other fields of medicine?
Surveys across multiple surgical specialties, including cardiac surgery, orthopedic surgery, maxillofacial, they have all found very similar experiences in their reporting. I mentioned earlier that in Australia and New Zealand, they did a similar study in 2015, and in a follow-up in 2018, they found very similarly that 40% of their respondents who were also ophthalmologists or those in training experienced discrimination in their workforce.
One of the limitations we often hear to surveys is that they may not be validated for the specific intention that they were desired. Was this survey validated for this investigation?
That is also a limitation of our study. There hasn't been a validated tool to look at this particular issue within a medical workforce. And so we did our best to gather best practices from other studies that have looked at this particular issue. And we used the approach of allowing for our respondents to use free responses in order to describe their experiences in much detail as they would care to share with us. By doing that, we felt that we were not limiting our respondents to any particular types of discrimination, for example, or sources or bases. And we were able to use all of their data in order to capture really broadly all the different themes that could be experienced by our respondents. And through that process, we were then able to categorize their respondents and kind of be as general as possible. And so we asked respondents if they believed that their gender, race or ethnicity, or LGBTQIA status subjected them to discrimination in the medical professional setting. And so we didn't define discrimination for them. We allowed this to be open-ended as possible for them to be able to think of how they experienced this issue.
Tell us a little more about the people who experience discrimination. How does this affect their satisfaction with their job? I mean, we always think of ophthalmology as a great career and that people are very satisfied. Does this have any association with how they perceive their job satisfaction? What did you find out in that regard?
We had asked for our respondents, first of all, to self-identify the negative consequences of their discrimination. And in addition to that, with our survey tool, we had asked respondents to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 their job satisfaction as well as their achievement of career outcomes. And so on the topic of their self-identified negative consequences, they most often reported feeling disrespect or experiencing passive aggression. And more concretely, they also experience loss of salary or loss of income, as well as loss of employment opportunities. On logistic regression analyses that control for age and gender, we found statistically significant association with lower job satisfaction as well as lower achievement of career goals for those who experienced at least one episode of discrimination.
So given these challenges and your findings, has your group thought about what the next steps might be? Did you identify any actions that might be considered or tested that might reduce this discrimination in the ophthalmology workforce in the future?
Yeah, certainly trying to understand the extent of the problem is really just the first step, as you're alluding to, and coming up with concrete steps to allow for change is an entirely different challenge. And this was beyond the scope of our paper, but it is really important for any interventions going forward to be studied. I think on the individual level, it starts with all of us to strive to model respectful and inclusive behavior. We can commit to listening and hearing what other people's experiences are and what their needs are. And we can call out discrimination as bystanders if we see it. I think it's natural when it comes to research and reporting on these topics like this, that it might feel a bit detached from the very human experiences behind it. And the human toll of feeling devalued and feeling disrespected is very real. And I hope that we take our mandate of caring for our patients and caring for others and extend that to our colleagues and trainees as well. All this is especially important for those of us who are in positions of leadership in our respective organizations. We saw in our report that the most common perpetrators of discrimination, surprisingly, were faculty members and hospital administrators. So that is to say that it's an issue that occurs more often when there's a power differential. So we have to examine ourselves and not think of this as another person's issue. Addressing discrimination also has to be valued at the organizational level, such as with clear anti-discrimination policies, a transparent reporting system, and dedicated time towards things such as implicit bias training. And finally, I think supporting mentorship programs can be very helpful in lifting those who may be disadvantaged in receiving opportunities as well. But importantly, like you said, any interventions we do, hopefully there will be study on that so that we can really know what's effective and move the needle forward.
Well, we're so thankful to you and your group for getting this conversation started and giving us some scientific facts on what the extent of this discrimination is in the ophthalmology workforce. And we look forward to hearing how those next steps may help us. And we thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention so that perhaps all institutions and groups can begin to address this in best ways possible. Dr. Nguyen, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for choosing our work to be highlighted on this platform, and I hope we continue to engage each other in this important conversation.
I'm Neil Bressler, and I've been speaking with Dr. Angeline Nguyen about discrimination within the U.S. ophthalmology workforce. You can find a link to this article in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for the JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.